Hello class. In this video we're going to go over skies. Skies I think I've mentioned before and I'll probably mention again. They're always in the background, but architects have really experimented with different ways of doing skies, and it sort of adds character and interest to the drawing. So we're going to go beyond just the basic gradient, which is fine. I've had the gradient with the clouds in there, but I want to look at some other things. And as usual in this video series, not only am I showing you because it's interesting, but also because I can show you a few new lessons. So in this one, what we're going to do is we're going to try to make the sky look more like a watercolor. And there's a couple benefits to that. One is, of course, that watercolor is a traditional rendering style for architects, and you could take what I'm going to do here for the sky and really apply it to potentially your whole drawing. And the whole drawing. Right now, the way I've started composing this to teach that, I'm almost making a Frankenstein type drawing where I'm going to have a watercolor sky. I've got this sort of colored pencil look ground and stuff like that. But you might take the ideas of the ground and apply it to the sky, or take ideas of like the watercolor and apply it to the ground. But I'm using the word watercolor here, but really what I'm really trying to do, what I think is a useful tool, is more than just thinking about it as like a watercolor simulator, is that all the effects that I've previously shown in these videos, they're very texture, like this grass down here, it's got little strokes, and most all of the effects, Photoshop effects, will do something at that level. Even the watercolor one, which of course doesn't even look like watercolor. But I've from time to time wanted to create a texture that is bigger than this tiny little, so I call it like a medium or large scale sort of texture or variation, and there's no effects that sort of easily get you there. So over time I've developed this series of this little process of using several effects to get something, in this case that'll look somewhat like watercolor, but really it's an effect to give you this mid or big level texture that you can really apply for anything, anytime you sort of need a bigger form of texture. This might be the easiest way of generating it. So with that, let me begin. I'm going to come over here, I'm going to go to my sky layer, and I'm going to unlock. It's already unlocked. I'm just going to move the sky to the side just so we can see what's going on a little bit better as I go ahead and do this. And we can see this is just this gradient here. And this is going to take a few steps, but I like the payoff. I like the payoff. So the first thing I'm going to do, which is arguably the most important part of this, is I'm going to go to texture, right? Because a lot of things for these Photoshop effects needs texture. But instead of going to grain like I do most often, I'm going to go to stained glass. And stained glass will work on even a solid color. And I'm going to show you when this pulls up here what it's going to do. So let me get this set up. I guess that'll be good. See, if I pull this over a little bit, I just want to zoom out. I'm going to be careful not to hit my video recorder here. Alright, so what you can see, stained glass is doing a couple of things that works to our advantage for this process. The most important of which is it's breaking down the field into these semi-randomized shapes, fields. And so this size is going to be the beginning of our texture, of this sort of mid-level size texture. So you want to set your cell size to whatever is appropriate for whatever size texture you want to get. So basically, if you come over to your cell size thing, if I make this bigger, my texture, if you will get bigger, and if I make this smaller, it'll get a bit smaller. But we know plenty of other ways to make small ones. So I'm looking for mid-size. I think I had this set at 46, 45, 46 for now. I think that'll be good. What I also want to do is you want to make sure one of the downsides of this method is that you have this border thickness, which I guess stained glass has, but we don't want. And there's going to be a step where we sort of get rid of this completely, but for now we want to set this all the way down to 1. It's impossible to set to 0. You can try, but it won't let you do it. So this is the smallest we can make the border. Then the other interesting thing that it does, that it helps, is because any sort of color variation or gradient will help this process. So the fact that our sky had a gradient, because that's what we applied to it, is nice. But a further one is that even if it's a solid color, or even in this case where we have another gradient, it has this light intensity, which is essentially just a radial gradient from the center. I think it's supposed to be as if the sun is sort of coming through. And in cases, maybe there might be a case here or there where you want it to be really bright, but I think just adding a nice little soft center gradient like that will just add to the interest of this. And you could go through and apply other gradients as well to help the process, and I've shown that how to add other fills to shapes in other videos, and you can continue to do that and sort of play with the interest of this as you will, and that will all have a positive effect on it. So anyway, that's the stained glass. It's the setting up of this mid-size gradient, so I'm just going to say OK. But clearly it still doesn't quite look right now. So the next thing what we're going to do is we are going to go back to another effect. We're going to go to, let's see, artistic, and we're going to go to cutout. Let this come up again. Here we go. And so what cutout does, it's not going to look much different than what we just saw. There is actually a subtle difference if you can't tell. What we want to do is we want to set our number of levels to around 4. If you go up, you can see what happens, the change there. If I go down, you can see the change there. And this is, when I put it down low, you can really see what it's doing. What it's basically saying is only provide basically like 2 levels of color, a light blue and a dark blue. And so it's changing what was subtle gradients into solid colors, which is going to help reinforce the mid-size sort of texture that we want, so it doesn't just all blend together. So if you set it about 4, at least for this particular one, again, any specific assignment, any specific scale, all these things go into a factor. What it does is it sort of gives you, like, this cell is different than this cell, which is different than this cell, but the cell itself is all the same color, right? So we're going to apply that and say OK. And we'll just notice a subtle difference change when this gets applied. There's very little difference, but it's a sort of an important one. All right, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to get rid of those black lines through another effect. So we're going to go back to artistic, and we are going to go to palette knife. I often find works best for this, although any of the other sort of artistic ones may do the job and may provide an interesting effect that you want to use for one purpose or another. And so we can see, as I zoom out, it sort of makes it all a little blurry, and through that blurriness, the line disappears. And so you can set your setting. I think these settings look pretty fine. I happen to have stroke size of 25, stroke detail of 3, and a softness of 0. But you can go ahead and play with that as you want. But I'm going to say OK there. We only have a couple more effects. I know it's a lot of effects, but really once you get the process down, if you write yourself notes, you can apply this pretty quickly. So there we go. So basically got rid of the black lines, so we just have octagonal shapes that are sort of solid fill colors. Okay, another effect. We're going to actually go to Distort this time, and I'm going to go with Ocean Ripple, although again glass might work for you as well, and various factors, colors, sizes, what the effect you're trying to go might want to use a slightly different result. And I'll show you what this does once the preview pops up here. This is going to do a couple things for us. One is it's going to, right now, our I'm going to call them polygons. I guess that's the right word for a shape like this. Our polygons are more rigid, and what this is going to do is going to break down the edges a little bit of those polygons and even shift the shape a little bit. So you could, so for example, if I sort of pull this up higher, you can see it really starts to break down those octagons and they get splotchier. Now, a result is, which isn't necessarily bad, is you get these sort of patterns skipping across the edge, which is in general a nice look, although it's definitely way too intense, which is why we have to have one more filter after this. So I'm just gonna, maybe go somewhere around here. I can see what these things do as well. You wanna just make it so it sort of starts to blur those edges a little bit, blur those polygons, but not so much that you sort of lose the the shapes and stuff that you're getting in there, or the texture that you're trying to get. So I'll say OK with that. Each one, of course, takes longer and longer to render. And then finally, we're just going to go through a process to one more time, just make sure it's nice and smooth and get rid of some of those wrinkles and further blur those polygons. And for that, we're going to go to Blur, Gaussian Blur. And I think around 20 is going to be nice, but I can check it by hitting this preview button. I'm at 23, so I might not even need to change it. So there we go. So you can see it sort of softens the edges and sort of blurs them a bit. And so I'll just say OK, I'll go with it. And it looks pretty decent from this far away. It's a little splotchy still, but again, like if I really were going to take a second take, maybe my cell size need to be bigger for what I'm trying to accomplish. But also, it's sort of important to know, as I zoom in to more of a realistic scale, those sort of things disappear, because when you're zoomed out, sometimes Illustrator sort of simplifies it, and ultimately a good test is to print it. But when I'm in almost full size, it looks smoother. I could probably increase the cell size a little bit to make it perfect, but it's not so bad, and it looks fairly decent, and it does add this mid-level of texture that I would be difficult to otherwise get. And as soon as I move it back into the drawing where it is further covered up by building, trees, and clouds, it looks even better as a sort of a texture. You've got little edges of white popping in that you didn't have before, just this little bit of texture that really adds interest to the drawing. So again, I think this is a good technique, not just, I'm going to save it, not just for creating watercolor, but really anytime you want to create a texture that's not so fine-grained, but not in your drawing. It's a good trick to do. So with that, you might explore that. You might explore a different sky. I'm going to have another video on a different sky just to show various options. Again, you really want to make sure things are blended together. So if you're doing a watercolor, like you might look at watercolors and see how the style is and how to maybe match the ground or the building rendering style, even in the same thing. They might be good to produce like a foggy look is a good way to do watercolors and things like that. Vice versa, you might not choose to do that. You might choose to build your drawing off of this. There's no right answer, but as I keep saying, you have an idea, I can help you get there. I'm just showing these videos are to show the tools so that you can do anything you want. All right.